Veuillez vous asseoir.
Please be seated, honorable members.
La séance est reprise.
We will resume our session now. Mr. Clerk, you have the floor to read the item on the order paper.
Merci, Excellence.
Thank you, Excellency. Presentation and debate on the report on climate change. Presentation and debate on the report on climate change. I invite Honorable Jacqueline AMONGIN, Chairperson of the Permanent Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and the Environment, to make her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Committee of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment, I would like to present a report on the Committee of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment in the second Parliamentary Summit on Climate Change that was held on the 10th to the 13th November 2015 in Safari Park Hotel, Nairobi, the Republic, Kenya. Okay, maybe before I embark on this report, Mr. President, I would like to recognize the role played by my Bureau of the Committee of Agriculture in my absentia, because I was busy campaigning in my country, in Uganda, where I actually thank you for your prayers, because besides everything, I made it to the 10th Parliament of the Republic of Uganda. Hopefully, I will be sworn in on the 10th on Monday, this next week. So thank you for your prayers and support, and the members of this committee in my absentia, all the contributions that you played a big role to make sure that this committee moves on. Thank you very much. I would say 2015 is a critical year in the global climate change policy discourse in December. Governments will be meeting. This is a report, because this was 2015, that was last year. So we are giving a report of last year. Meeting in Paris to hammer an elusive international climate agreement to help contain the growth of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and provide support for communities that need to build resilience to the adverse effects of climate change. As the region at the front line, climate change impacts with least capacity to adapt, the African continent desires an ambitious climate agreement responsive to its realities and aspirations, and to effectively defeat the challenges of climate change. And the Universal Climate Pact should not only be fair, but also equitable and just. This means the agreement must recognize both the respective contributions of countries to address climate change and the changing nature of the global economy. It must be acknowledged where nations have more responsibility and where they have more or less capacity to tackle climate change and adapt to its effects. Advancing African common goal for a fair, ambitious and effective outcome in the Paris conference requires, among other things, pressure on both developing and developed countries in the negotiations, and by civil society, social movement to hold governments to account. The right strategy for governments, intergovernmental institutions, and civil society in developing countries therefore lies at the heart of efforts to secure success in the negotiations. Such a strategy could and support governmental level sufficient to generate desirable political power, counter laggards and opponents, and tackle climate change in practice. A formidably strong African voice, which is inclusive, people-driven and backed by the highest political commitment possible, is a requisite for securing a desirable deal for Africa in regards to COP21. In the lead up to the United Nations Conference, COP21, Conference of Parties in Paris, various partners have unified their effort that seeks to consolidate various efforts by faith leaders, youth, women, smallholder farmers, indigenous people, parliamentarians to ultimately contribute to Africa's formidable voice in the COP21. In this context, a segment of stakeholders that have been ignored in climate change discourse, important as it might be, is ourselves, the legislators in various African parliaments. A summit hosted in 2009 through a partnership between PACJA, UNEP, Oxfam, COMESA, the National Assembly, and the Pan-African Parliamentarians Network on Climate Change demonstrated that members of parliament can use their legislative space, clout, and political profiles to drive policy agendas into national laws in various countries. That means contributing the integrating climate change into national policy frameworks in the national assemblies and development plans. The post-summit actions included sponsoring of individual motions in respective countries, which has resulted into enactment of climate-specific laws. The self-driven initiative by various parliamentarians continue to broaden awareness and consciousness on climate change by parliamentarians. Henceforth, Mr. President, the participation of the Pan-African Parliament through its Permanent Committee of Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment participated in the second Parliamentarian Summit, which was held in Nairobi, Kenya from the 10th to the 13th November 2015, came to further support existing efforts towards the formalization of a unified African common position in the parish. The second Parliamentarian Summit, organized in partnership between National Assembly of Kenya, Oxfam, UNEP, PACJA, and IISD. Mr. President, I would therefore like to report that the summit came up with the following objectives. 1, to identify the African Common Agenda in the countdown to COP21 and the role parliamentarians can play in the ongoing climate change negotiations for future responses to climate change. To strategize on how to jointly and effectively engage in climate justice and equity advocacy with other stakeholders, such as civil society, development partners, private sector, research community, and academic sector, both in the lead up to Paris and the period after. To explore possible long-term intergovernmental and cross-border cooperation on climate change interventions, particularly in the management of natural resources threatened by climate change, such as rivers, lakes, forests, etc. To identify and define the action agenda for different stakeholders, policymakers, civil society organizations, government negotiators, regional economic blocs, such as the RECs, and leaders to support global and national actions to enable communities adequately respond to climate change in ways that guarantee their livelihoods. Honorable members, to share experiences and challenges, especially the action agenda, including a communique by national parliaments and particularly the Pan-African Parliament and such initiatives as the Pan-African Parliament Network on climate change. Expected outcomes. After this summit, these were the expected outcomes: enhanced awareness and coordinated approach among members of the Pan-African Parliament and the parliamentary initiatives driving climate change agenda in African countries. Increased participation and visibility of parliamentarians in national, regional, and international climate dialogue processes. An action plan for parliamentarians in the COP21 and the period beyond. That means if you participated in the COP21 in France. A communique that upholds African unified position as driven by other key stakeholders, civil society, etc., and which affirms the principle of environmental integration as well as climate justice. Mr. President and honorable colleagues, I would also like to report that the participants in this summit were drawn from the various sectors and countries. We were 25 members of the Committee of the Agriculture, Rural Economy and Environment participated from the PAP, but 17 members attended the summit. Parliamentarians from National Assembly of Kenya, representatives from Oxfam, UNEP, IISD and PACJA staff members from the Secretariat of the PAP, as well as many other local civil society organizations participated in this summit. As you may see in your annexure is the list of participants. But because of time, I will be jumping some of these, what the preparatory meetings, so you may have to ignore that. Mr. President, this session was held in Kenya, and the guest of honor was supposed to have been the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta. However, the session was officially opened. The President delegated the Speaker of the Senate of Kenya to deliver the keynote speech on behalf of the President. And of course, different honorable people of Africa presented. We have my colleague, Honorable Amina Abdallah. It's a mistake to put Chairperson of the Committee of Agriculture because I'm the Chairperson of the Committee of Agriculture, National Assembly of Kenya. Honorable Abdul Jaula, Deputy Chairperson of the PAP, my colleague, and in your absentia, I recognize the role you played in this committee in my absentia. Mr. Misiki Mwenda, Secretary General, Pan-African Climate Justice. Winnie Bianyima, Executive Director, Oxfam. Representation from IYALA, the Ambassador from France to Kenya, and Minister for Environment and Natural Resources, Kenya. Honorable members, a summary of the presentations. 6 presentations were made during the summit under the theme on impact on climate change. The first presentation was handling climate change projections for African overall impact and implications for development, and key concerns were highlighted by the participants. The second presentation was on the role of science, technology, and innovation policy in climate change response in African countries. Also, key recommendations as per the paper that you see. The third presentation was on the role of parliamentarians' legislative approach in response to climate change in Africa. The fourth presentation was a reflection on the first Pan-African Summit in climate change, and there was a need for continuous summits prior to COP21. There was also a presentation on the roadmap to COP21 and what would be the role of the different stakeholders in moving the African agenda forward. The other presentation was an overview of the negotiations, key issues and current status in building global consensus on universal climate change agreement. There was also a good presentation on climate change and disaster in Africa. Having summed up that, honorable colleagues, I would like therefore to say that the summit came up with a final communique, and which communique is hereby attached to your to this presentation. I hope you'll be able to read it. Mr. President, this summit came up with recommendations. The participation of the PAP on rural economy, PAP's Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment was very successful. The summit offered the committee the opportunity to interact with various stakeholders and hence manage not only to enhance its current networks of partners, but also to establish new partnerships with various organizations. The Committee on Agriculture also strongly believes that the issue of climate change has become one of the important issues in the national, regional, and international agenda. Annual global events such as the COPs, and other similar events have begun gaining a lot of attention. They are also providing important platforms that bring together a wide range of stakeholders. This entails that PAP and relevant permanent committees should actively engage, contribute, and take advantage of such events. However, Mr. President, financial constraints always remain the biggest challenge in realizing such a goal. The overdependence on development partners to support the participation of the PAP and its relevant committee in such events, really undermining the level and quality of such participation, because I realized as a committee chair, we had designated members to travel to France, but at the end of the day, having relied on donors, we did not have money and the members could not be able to make it to the France to participate in the COPs. The Committee on Agriculture further noticed that in order to have a meaningful participation in future COP events, there is an urgent need to build the capacity of parliamentarians and the PAP staff in the area of climate change, in addition to other technical aspects relating to COP, like process of registration, nature of participation, organization of side events, among others. This will assist the Secretariat of the PAP to properly and timely facilitate the participation of the honorable colleague members in the future events. These are therefore the recommendations that we have come up with as a committee. In the light of the above, the Committee on Agriculture wishes to make the following specific recommendations. 1, PAP should develop a concrete work plan for the annual participation in the COP. It should be part of the PAP's agenda. PAP should mobilize adequate financial resources to secure the participation of the committees relevant in global annual events such as the conferences of parties. PAP should set up an ad hoc committee to coordinate and organize the participation of the PAP and its relevant committees in future conferences of parties. PAP, through its development partners, should build the capacity of the parliamentarians in areas related to climate change and other technical aspects. Building the capacity of the staff working with the relevant committee in areas related to the technical aspects of the participation in future COP. In particular, registration in COP, nature of participation, organization of side events, all this will enable staff to facilitate the participation of parliamentarians. And PAP should also coordinate with the relevant organs of the African Union Commission to harmonize the participation of African Union in the future COP events. Approach similar to the Joint Election Observer Mission encouraged to be adopted in this regard so that we come up with a common African position. Honorable members, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for listening to this precise presentation of the Committee of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment. Merci, obrigado, asanteni sana, shukran, yalama, thank you.
Thank you very much. J'ai devant moi.
I have before me a list of 19 speakers. The first person on my list is Honorable Mwe Boningaba from Burundi, Honorable Senator from Kenya, Honorable from Sudan, Honorable from South Africa, Honorable from Guinea-Conakry, Honorable Bernadette Lahai from Sierra Leone, Honorable from Tanzania, Honorable Chief Chirumbira from Zimbabwe, Honorable from Egypt, Honorable from Swaziland, Honorable from Togo, and Honorable from Cameroon, Honorable from Mauritius, Honorable from Ethiopia, Honorable from Rwanda, Honorable from Sudan, Honorable Diko from Niger, and Honorable from Egypt. So I first give the floor to the first person on my list, that is Honorable Mwe Boningaba from Burundi. Thank you very much, President. I pass. Thank you very much, dear colleague. And I'll give the floor to Honorable Senator Janet Mongera from Kenya.
Je donne la parole à l'honneur.
I give the floor to Honorable Sultan Hashim Idris from Sudan.
شكرا أخي الرئيس على هذا.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. I would like to thank the Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture and Natural Resources and the Environment. It is true, Mr. President, this is an extremely important topic, and the importance of this matter lies in the fact that our African continent is not ready to meet this big challenge. And in addition, it is true that the superpowers are at the cause of the climate change, and we know that these countries have research centers, databases that enable them to address this challenge and find some solutions to the problem. But in Africa, we do not have these means, and therefore the issue of climate change, according to this excellent report presented and the reported recommendations put forward, I would like to give some practical advice and see that how we can determine what are the means and the ways that this reports also trickle down to our societies. Our people at the grassroots have very limited means and who are not the cause of this phenomenon. So, Mr. President, I would like to suggest to our colleagues that we organize a conference to bring together the President of the Pan-African Parliament and the speakers of national parliaments together with the African Union in order to design a strategy and a method to address the challenge posed by climate change. And this must be done for the following reasons. We don't want the current tools available and the mechanisms we have within our institutions. We see that these means cannot help us to address the issue of climate change, and we cannot let each individual member state of our parliament to provide the information to our parliaments. As we know, we lack a lot of harmonization of legislation, and there are some leaders. Thank you very much. I give the floor to Honourable Santos Denita Kenyan from South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. The presentation indeed was quite a comprehensive one, and I alluded earlier when I spoke on the e-governance how important it is for us to migrate to an e-parliament as soon as possible, simply because of the amount of paper that we generate for these meetings. And also, I mean, I think the Pan-African Parliament uses up almost a forest each time it comes to meet. And that, in fact, affects the amount of oxygen that we have and other things. As a challenge to all the MPs that come to the Pan-African Parliament and who travel for their own countries, I would like you to calculate what your carbon footprint is. So that you will know how much you are contributing to the climate situation we find ourselves in. The drought effects of climate change cannot be underestimated. Here in South Africa at the moment, we are experiencing a severe drought. This is impacting on food security. And it has a ripple effect because the animals don't have enough water. We actually have water restrictions. Where I come from in Durban, the eThekwini municipality has got water restrictions. We've actually got water restrictors now in our pipes at home so that the amount of water that you're using is limited. And in certain areas, we even have a shutdown of the water at night from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. the next morning so that the pressure can build up and so on and so forth. In conclusion, Mr. President, one of the resolutions is that the committee should meet soon and start planning for the next one. I agree with that. However, I'd like to add another dimension to this. Climate change is not purely the territory of agriculture or rural development. It's across all our portfolios, because it involves education, it involves health, it involves social development. So I would like to say that we should form a committee so that all the permanent committees are represented, and then they can go back to their committees and say this is what the angle is going to be for us. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Honourable. I now give the floor to Honourable Diallo from Guinea-Conakry. Thank you very much, Honourable President. In turn, I would like to congratulate the Chairperson of the Permanent Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and the Environment, the Honourable Jacqueline, for her sterling presentation. The common African position needs to be commended, because that gives us political clout to the countries that help us to counter the countries that didn't want us to move forward in developing our strategy to counter climate change. And luckily, fortunately, all the countries in the world took cognizance of the danger of this effect, and they are developing strategies to combat the emission of greenhouse gases and to mitigate their effect. The Protocol Kyoto is far behind us now, but we know that the major polluters who are still lagging behind managed to take stock of the phenomenon. We see more devastating hurricanes, such as Katrina, for example. And we all welcome the African participation in COP21, in particular the participation of the Pan-African Parliament, which contributed significantly to this event by making very relevant proposals in support of the flagship project of Mr. Jean Lebolo on the electrification of Africa. In our countries, we must persevere and prevent the practices that contribute to climate change, in particular deforestation. And we see that there are some advances, but nevertheless, some of the practices in our populations who might produce other problems that have a negative impact on biodiversity or our ecosystems. And we need to remain very vigilant. I would request just 1 minute. For example, in Guinea, everyone applauded the building of the hydroelectric dam, which to a large extent managed to close the electricity gap our country was faced with. And this project included a social strand and especially an infrastructure strand. The social strand, insofar as it also enabled to establish schools and other dispensaries in the area around the dam. And in addition, they will also build important infrastructure. The first was a 200-meter long bridge, and the people used to take a vessel to cross the river, but thanks to this project, this bridge was built, and now vehicles can cross the bridge. So what did we notice? We see that the people used to cut down the trees to produce coal and trade with this, and this led to deforestation, which threatened the very sources of the rivers, and this had a significant impact, as the hydroelectric potential of this river is significant. It can even make Guinea a large producer of energy. So therefore, I would like to wish that PAP participates in COP22 in Morocco with a greater delegation to have a greater impact. And for that, we need to take into account the recommendations made by the committee. I thank you.
Very much, Mr. President. Let me thank Jackie and the committee for this report. While I agree with the recommendations of this report, Madam Kelly really drew the carpet from under my feet, because every now and again, either on this floor or in our committees, I've always stressed the interrelationship between committees when it comes to climate change. Climate change is such a cross-cutting issue that, especially when we prepare for the summit from this parliament, we should ensure that we hold a cross-cutting committee meetings, so that committees whose activities are intricately linked to climate change will also have an input. For example, if you take the Committee on Transport, Energy, Industry, Science and Technology, climate change is all an issue of emission of gases, either by industries or when we produce energy using fossil fuel, or when we use air, land, river or water transportation. All these leave behind very huge carbon print. Of course, when we have drought or we have a flood, communities are affected. So you look at the human rights issues, you look at the food security issues. New strains of diseases are introduced as a result of climate change. New weeds become introduced. And when communities move as a result of climate change, there are international cooperation implications. There are human rights implications. So in this regard, I think we should do well in this parliament to look at not only for climate change, but other equally international issues, to see which committees are cross-cutting, and let us use the synergy of those committees. This way we will also be maximizing our meager resources, and we will also be looking at the issues of Africa from a broader perspective, from a multifaceted perspective, so that at the end of the day, our solutions are also multifaceted. I thank you very much.
I thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable David Ernest Silinde from Tanzania.
Asante. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor to speak. Well, also to contribute on the impact of climate change. His Excellency, the impact on climate change, when we have any kind of flood or anything else, there is nobody who is far from this impact. Honorable President and members of the committee, when you talk about impact of climate change, we talk about floods, drought, we talk about something like cyclone, earthquake. We also talk about a volcano, and we also talk about the establishment of new industries which are just dealing with chemicals. So these issues, when we keep on experiencing them, we cannot see the impact all of a sudden, because you can say, maybe I'm developed than these other countries, I won't just experience any impact. But still, the major issue in this presentation, when we see people who are causing a lot of impact as regards climate change, it's these developed countries, especially Europe and America. These are the cause of all these problems linked to climate change. That's why we see, to make sure that we pursued Africa and make sure that we don't suffer from all these catastrophes, because they believe that when their industry will continue to produce, because they will keep on just polluting the air, and Africans will be the one to suffer against, impacts of climate change. When you look at the countries that were causing these problems, but they are not ready to make sure that we get rid of this problem. And we see it almost every time. So I'd like to say that we as Africa, we have to face this problem and make sure that we fight against these challenges. We see the city plans. We have to get some nice city plans because most of our countries are not planned. Cities are not planned. And to let us make sure that we preserve our forests, and there should be big area to preserve forests, and insist that people can plant trees. Because if you see our agriculture, people are just cultivating, they just cut trees. If you look at any issue dealing with livestock from Sudan to North Kenya, there is a kind of drought that is every day we are experiencing. So East African countries, Central Africa and Southern Africa, within 20 years, we are going to experience many issues about drought. So let us see how we can just face this challenge. We have got big companies, multinationals, which are coming to invest in our countries. They are not abiding with the laws as regards environment, and we are afraid to tell them the truth because we are afraid of spoiling our cooperation and relations with these multinationals. We as Tanzanians, for example, in order to face this challenge, we have to get one voice. When we have African Barrick, we have to get the opportunity to tell him, make sure that you respect and you abide by the law to make sure that we preserve the environment. And by so doing, we can just face and find solution to these problems of linked to climate change. And thank you very much for giving me the floor.
From Bureau du Zimbabwe. Je donne la parole à l'honorable Mustafa El Gendi de l'Égypte.
I'm giving the floor to Egypt. I would like to give the floor to the Honorable Bongani from Swaziland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me also appreciate the effort and the report that has been brought in by the Committee in Agriculture. It is quite a pertinent issue we have beforehand, the issue of climate change, because climate change is reshaping human civilization. And it is quite important that as members of Parliament we pronounce ourselves on this issue. It is how we respond to it that will really determine the future of our species. Because our food system, our economies, our cities, our communities, they are all adapted to the climate we live in. And if the climate is changing faster than we can keep up, then there is a problem. It is for that reason, Mr. President, that it should be everybody's interest to make sure that we come together so that we see how we find a way out to this mammoth task. The fate of our planet, which we call home, is very uncertain when you are talking about the issue of climate change. And I'm happy that as the Honorable Madam was the chairperson of the committee was presenting, she did mention that the meeting they had had was in preparation of maybe coming together with a consensus in order to make themselves meaningful when it comes to summits that are ahead, summits like COP. So I really appreciate and applaud that the committee is planning beforehand. It shows that they are really up to it. Because really, Mr. President, we do not want to see a situation like Copenhagen in 2009, which brought home something with very weak political statement. It was just a summit that was just noted, and it didn't come out with anything binding. We are looking forward at COP, Mr. President, because it is legally binding to bring us something meaningful, something that will be a way out of this problem we have. And I've been reading, Mr. President, the recommendations of the committee, and I will be very happy indeed if what they will present next on this very topic will be how they are going to take forward the issue that we have, because it is quite a serious one. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. I would like to give the floor to the Honourable Amoussouvi Badenou from Togo. Thank you very much, Mr. President. After hearing my colleague from Swaziland, I pass. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I will give the floor to the Cameroon. Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. President, we are aware that Africa is the continent who is, in fact, the least polluting and, in fact, has the least greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, it's the continent that suffers the most consequences from the effects of greenhouse gas. Notably, speaking of climate, where climate change has very serious consequences, and particularly for the agricultural sector. It seems to me then imperative, Mr. President, that given the seriousness of this phenomenon, that Africa be aware and acts not as it has done up to now and in a dispersed way, but in a single voice, facing what is destroying Africa. Because the propagation of these greenhouse gases does not have any continental limit. And we need to remember that it is a developed country, and unfortunately, developed countries do not, in fact, hesitate to use Africa as a waste, as a disposable of garbage, as it were. When I said that Africa should have a single position and a single voice, it is so that Africa can, in fact, ask those who are responsible for producing the most greenhouse gases for compensation. And this has been said in the past, but unfortunately we've become aware that in this area we are now hearing more voices in Africa, and each region is in fact defending its own position depending on its own interests. But in reality we are all exposed to this phenomenon, and we need to in fact react together. There is a necessity to, in fact, present a common front against the developed world, who are, in fact, those who are responsible for the biggest quantity of greenhouse gases. These compensations You have one more minute, sir. You have 1 more minute, sir. It's become evident that Africa hosts the second largest forest reserves in the world after Amazon, and constitutes as such a lung for humanity because it absorbs the greenhouse gases. So we need to insist, we need to continue asking that the developed countries, in fact, pay us compensation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Senator. Now I would like to give the floor to Honourable Malini Sewakinsi from Mauritius. Honorable Malini, I give the floor to the Honorable Dekle Sema from Ethiopia.
I also thank the presenter. Mr. President, the climate change is one of the critical challenge in this century in relation to terrorism. When we come to the impacts of climate change, we can see the effect of tsunami, the flooding, drought that affects all the living space. In this regard, when the degree of impact of climate change is more than terrorism that affects the life of the people, innocent people. And when we come to Africa, we are very vulnerable. Our people are not able to cope the impact of this climate change effects. So I don't know whether we have a common strategy to mitigate this climate change in Africa. In my view, it's very important to set up the common strategy continentally to cope with or to mitigate climate change. Regarding Ethiopia, we have 1 month per year. We mobilize our community for the conservation of soil and water, as well as to mobilize the people for environmental protection. In this regard, I think it's better to mobilize our people to adapt as well as to mitigate and protect themselves from the current very dangerous and very high effect of climate change. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the Honorable Jacqueline from Rwanda. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity to be able to contribute to this very important subject. Mr. President, we will not be able to reach the objectives of sustainable development without finding solutions to the vulnerability as a result of the negative effects of climate change. All this our strategy, of course, needs to encompass all these issues. We should avoid the development which might lead, in fact, to an added vulnerability to climate change and also to the effects of climate change for our communities. Mr. President, an observation that I wanted to make, in fact, you reminded us this morning, it was the follow-up of the recommendations made during COP21, and particularly the follow-up for the energy project for Africa and the creation of a financing structure for energy in Africa. Honourable members of Parliament, I think we should also strengthen our responsibility in terms of lawmakers, and we should make sure that our development should always be resilient in terms of climate change through our budgets, through our process also of our governments. The project for Africa, we really need to make a follow-up. We need to have, in fact, a limit in terms of that we need to have a period. We seem to have a date for the protection of our forests, for the protection of our biodiversity, and also make absolutely sure that polluters honor their commitments, particularly to do with the Conference of the Parties. But I would also like to thank in particular Honourable and the President of this committee for a very good report, very well drafted and very well presented. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Honourable Bashir Ali Mohamed Al-Batini from Sudan. I would like to give the floor to Honourable Asane Mabikudu from Niger. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I pass. Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to the Honourable from Côte d'Ivoire. I would like to give the floor to the Honorable May Abdoulaye from Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity given to me. I'd like to thank the chairperson of the committee for this presentation and report. The issue of the climate change has become a priority on the agenda, on the international agenda, and not the African agenda only. This issue will change the climate of the world, but it has also adverse effects on all sectors of human life. Mr. President, the African nations will be the more vulnerable to climate change, while the developed countries are just escaping their responsibilities as they are the causes of such climate change. And today, we are asking a question to all nations. Is Africa doomed to become the plant or of the world, that is the waste deposit of the world? Many species are just disappearing from the face of the earth. And we are all aware of the effects of the climate change, that is as well as the increase in temperature and the rise in sea levels, as well as all the other effects that we are all aware of. And according to experts, the increase in temperature levels will impact on the animal and human lives on the earth. Moreover, the rise in the Caribbean sea level, will lead to the disappearance of more than 6,000 of species of plants and more than 300 of species of animals. This is why we need to build our capacities and build the capacities especially in the least developed countries in order to put an end or to address the issue of climate change and to also to mitigate the effects. Just 1 minute more, Mr. President, please. There are some proposals that can be made and that can mitigate the effects of climate change, including the implementations of modern agricultural techniques, as well as the use of non-carbon techniques in our industries and in our agriculture as well. And the use of the RDF, for instance, that is used from the waste of animal waste, and this is what has been done by Egypt so far in order to reduce the waste, the quantities of waste, and transform them into fuel, a low carbon fuel especially, in order to decrease and mitigate the effects of the GHGs. Thank you.
Ou dire ma surprise de voir le Parlement.
I was very surprised to see the Parliament not congratulate itself for the victory that it had in France. For those, in fact, who read the Paris Agreement, the only time that Africa was, in fact, spoken about was to do with the energy project. And God only knows the amount of work that was done by this Parliament so that we actually reached this. So I have now listened to everyone. I very much wanted to thank all the colleagues who spoke, Santos and Jacqueline, who find that the problems linked to climate change is not the problems of a particular particular sector. It's actually a cross-cutting issue. We need to, in fact, redouble our efforts. For that, everybody, all our efforts should be done together so that we can really do something. If Africa was able to speak of something which is, in fact, was in its name, it was actually thanks to this Parliament. And I can tell you that Africans went there. It was we were more than 50 delegations. If you actually think that each delegation had 10 minutes to speak, you can imagine how much time we actually had to listen to others. And when the final reports are made, there was just a little small title to speak about energy in Africa. And that's the importance that was accorded us. So you listen to Senator Hondoa. Cameroon is, as in fact the second biggest forest reserve after the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I would like to say to you that Senator Hondoa was Minister, in fact, of Forest and Environment for 7 years. And I was, in fact, working in that sector. We fought, and it was him, in fact, to reform the sector in Cameroon, because today we've actually gone, in fact, from an artisanal, in fact, economy to, in fact, now a new modernized. So if I now speak to you about the two latest COPs, there was a COP in Copenhagen, we were in Cancun, we didn't agree. So the first time that we actually had an agreement was in Paris. And what we need to do is, in fact, to try to actually do a follow-up of this agreement, at least in terms of the application of this, of the implementation. And it wasn't ratified yet. And I know that Kyoto, for example, was also never ratified. The court, in fact, also it was never ratified, and I'm sure that this protocol and that this particular agreement, Paris Agreement, we will ratify it, but its to implementation will be a problem. We talked about $100 billion, in fact, for Africa and for countries in development. And when we talk about developing countries, it's not just in Africa. We can talk about Fiji, we can talk about Pacific Islands, we talk about Latin America. There are many other countries that are also developing countries who will benefit, in fact, from this agreement. So what we actually need to do now, as the President herself said, is that we need to prepare ourselves. We need to prepare ourselves financially for a very good participation in COP22. Because that is how it's done. Because now COP21 is done, and now it's going to be very difficult, because it was the countries who were playing for the participation of its own delegations. But we had to actually get together. We had to form a pressure group. We had to go to all the workshops. We had to scream, spend 3 days at the end of the COP, and we still had to go through 50 pages of negotiations. So it was only then that we could scream and scream until our voices were heard, and since we finally obtained a result. So I wanted to say that this Parliament is trying to evolve. We are trying to do things, in fact, for the whole world, and I think we should congratulate ourselves. We should not be ashamed. When we went to Paris, and we went with our own means. It was in winter, and it was very difficult. People had to actually go every single morning, go to the meetings, go and make noise when noise needed to be made, so that we could actually be heard. So if we really want to do something, it means that finally we want one Africa with a single voice, and I think it's finally bearing fruit. So I would really like to congratulate you, and I would like to congratulate our Parliament for the efforts that were made. Now, for COP22, as the President has already said, it is now that we have to start preparing COP22. And as some of the honourables have already said, let's help one another. Let's have ideas together. So between COP21 and 22, we need to make absolutely sure that the implementation of the Paris Accord is effective. And that is why I suggested that we need, in fact, ask again Jean-Louis Borloo to come and to tell us where we are at, because it is, in fact, the only paragraph that where Africa about. It wasn't very long. So there were commitments made, and Africa doesn't pollute, as has already been said. Today in Cameroon, we've gone actually from we had 50%. Now it's 10% in terms of we do in fact what is an exploitation that is in fact durable. So we're not asking for the world. What we are asking is funds to be able to help us, because it's not just a question. They ask us, for example, to not eat wild meat. They ask us to not cut our trees. They're always asking us to do things, and we always agree to a consensus. But really, the only thing that could do any good for us is unfortunately the only thing that they do is in fact to bring their waste to us. So we need to continue to play our part in negotiations. Our voice needs to be heard, because our executives, in fact, those in fact who represent us, are always limited. They're not allowed to always speak, but we, members of Parliament, can speak very loudly. We can say that we're representing our own people for something to be said. I wanted to share this information with you to tell you that Paris was not easy, and I think that Morocco will also be difficult. For agreement, in fact, to be implemented, it means that at least half the countries ratify it. And if you take the numbers of countries in the world, I think there will only be half the countries in the world that will ratify it up until COP22. So, dear colleagues, we have much to do. Be courageous. Let's support one another. Let's support African initiatives. That is what I wanted to say. Madam President of the committee, I would like to now give the floor to you to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, merci.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President.
I would like, first of all, to congratulate you, the President, and the House for all the responses that you have given and the harmony of the contributions from members. I wouldn't really like to speak so much, because I know that whatever you have raised was a supportive voice in move the climate agenda forward, and this can only be done through the different international forums. But the most important is the COPs. And I know that when the president has already spoken, it means that everything most of the things have been mentioned. But I want to raise a few issues in regards to what has come from the floor, and which I really feel that as a chairperson of this committee I concur with, that the report should get to the national parliaments. That's very critical, because even when we cannot afford to participate in such forums, at least our national parliaments perhaps can afford to send some few delegates to participate. And that's very critical, because at the end of it all, it will be an African position. If I go from Uganda, for example, if she goes from South Africa or wherever country. So I think that's very critical. But also, since the African Union and this organ of the African Union, a parliament of the Pan-African Parliament, hosts a national speakers conference, it is something that we could raise in one of the speakers conference, so that the speakers of the various parliaments could actually have a say in their national parliaments in regards to issues of climate change. Because to me, I've grown up as a climate activist, and when we were growing up, they were telling us to act locally but impact globally. And I think that should be something that we should go with. And then I also 100% support the idea of having the e-parliament. Most parliaments now, even in Uganda, we are no longer carrying papers like this. We just have an e-parliament where everything is uploaded on our iPad. And then in case of any changes, it is still done on our iPad. I'm actually in the Parliament of Uganda right now, if I would have an iPad with me. So I think it is, Mr. President, a good recommendation from the Honourable Member from South Africa. In a way, we will still be averting the issues of climate change. So I think as a Parliament of the African Union, we could start from here. The committee The other recommendation was on the committee meeting as soon as possible to plan for the COP22, which is supposed to take place in Morocco. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And besides, the Committee of Agriculture has just spearheaded this, but we believe that we can work hand in hand because the climate change issues are cross-cutting issues to even the other committees of energy, committee, even of education. People need to learn about climate change. So I think it should be something that we could harmonize as a PAP and come up with a lead team that could coordinate the whole PAP so that when we go to COPs, we come up with a harmonized voice working closely with the African Union Commission. Coming up with a common position is good. Linkage of committees, I've already mentioned about that. And then there should be meetings organized prior to COP22, COP23, COP by the PAP. I want to believe that the PAP can own these meetings, liaise with other partners, and organize the meeting, because we realize I was in Peru in the COP, I was in Poland, I was also in Durban, I was in the very, very different countries attending the COPs, but being, as I was chairing, I was from my country, sponsored by my country. But to realize that there are so many meetings that take place there, there are so many side events that take place there. If you go there just to attend and you're not organized, you might not contribute meaningfully to the African agenda. So having meetings prior to going into COPs helps us to organize and also helps us to liaise with other African negotiators so that we go there with a common voice. I would think that that should be a very good recommendation from the floor. And then the honorable member from Sudan mentioned about the emissions. Yes, it is true. We are very vulnerable as the African continent, because when you look at development, it also goes hand in hand with the level of emissions. For example, the other continents emit so much to the environment compared to the African continent. So you find that we are always the people who end up being most affected compared to the other continents. But when we go to the COPs and when we are presenting the text on the financing for climate change, then the great emitters like the US, then the China say, okay, we will pay. But I think it is going beyond payment. But how much of this payment are we getting? If you look at the green fund, it has just remained lip service. Different countries committed that, okay, we shall contribute, especially the big emitters, the big five. But at the end of the day, it is not comparable to the level of emission they do on the environment. We also have the Global Environment Facility. That has also remained lip service, as most countries commit, but they don't. And even the African countries, most of them do not even know how to access this fund. After 1 year and we are going to another COP, then another text is mentioned about, they change the text in terms of financing. I think it's a high time that as an African continent, we woke up from the slumberland, that is from the sleep. And I believe that it can start from here. Thank you, Mr. President, for your contributions while you went to Paris. It's quite unfortunate that most of the members who were meant to have been there could not make it, as the most African countries could not facilitate their members to attend the COP. I hope that in Morocco it will be for the better. I want to thank you, honorable members, for listening and for your contributions. I am sure together we will get there. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much.
Discussion générale.
Thank you very much indeed. The general discussion is closed now.
Mr. President, a motion was submitted to your office last week that we designate Honorable Asbir Gao as Ambassador of the Pan-African Parliament, charged with the promotion and the signing and the ratification of the protocol as revised by the National Assembly of the African Union. Since the Parliament is almost coming to an end, I hereby move that the motion be heard for various reasons. One, the reason why I said it should be moved for various reasons, Mr. Gao, since it comes from Ethiopia and his house is very close to the African Union, it will be easier for him to move these agendas to the African Union with no cost effective. So I therefore move that the motion be heard. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this work has to be done by everybody.
Thank you. Yes, sit down, please. Please, wait 1 minute. Je voudrais qu'on soit...
The African Union Commission is in Ethiopia. When our heads of states go to Ethiopia, they have an agenda, a prior agenda, so we have to prepare them. Each of us, therefore, should be ambassador to what has been said here, so that once our heads of state are in Addis Ababa, they're already aware of what's been presented and proposed here. I do agree with you, but let's work with our states, because this Paris Accord, all African heads of states went on the last 22nd of April, and this has been signed by all African leaders. We don't have a problem as far as we are concerned. The problem is on the side of those who pollute. So if the U.S. does not sign, and China as well as China, what would be our role? How can we behave? I think that what we can do is to support an initiative that is feasible and useful for our continent. Yes, you have the floor, sir, to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think the honourable member, Jaula from Gambia, has a valid point. I would like to say that when we designated Honourable Ahmadi, we did not say we should also designate another former president like Honourable Mongela. And now motion move it only for Honourable Dr. Gayo. If there is another motion for another member, we can consider in the future. Mr. President, moreover, nothing we can lose if we designate Honourable Gayo. He will not ask for money from PAP. You know, he's a Pan-Africanist that we know, who lives in Addis, who is well connected, who has his own influences. Honourable members, I would like to mention that the AU passport now we have today, the electronic passport that we have today, it was the whole Peru that pushed. But without Dr. Gayo, it would have been very difficult to realize to have that electronic passport. It was him that pushed for us. And I think for him to advocate for our institution and for Pan-African Parliament, it will be very important and very useful. That's why I support the motion. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Chers collègues,
my dear colleagues, may I have your attention? I think that we need to harmonize all that we are doing here. A decision of a bureau was made on the 1st of March that says that from now on will be considered as follows. All the former vice president will be the honorarium vice presidents, and all the president's ambassadors. And it is precisely because we made of Honorable Ahmadi ambassador, and we haven't thought about Honorable Mongela. And I think, therefore, that to harmonize our work, a decision was made and will be submitted tomorrow as a resolution. I think it's fairer, because our previous and former vice presidents, Louis Kasingo, Van Dune, if each time a motion is submitted for each of everyone, this won't be fair. Therefore, I think that we have to abide by the decision of the Bureau. And I think that in this respect, the discussion is closed. I'm submitting now the report on the climate change to the Chamber. No observation, no amendment. Adopted. Dear colleagues, I'd like to admit that our Chamber has registered a very good participation to our proceedings this session. I would like to invite you to do further for us to work together and make common decisions. And with regard to the pressure under which we've been working for 2 days, to announce that we will close our session tomorrow, and I wish that all the MPs that are still here be here for the closing session of our work and vote the resolutions that will be submitted to you. The order is now over. The session is adjourned and we will resume tomorrow at 9. Thank you.